Good day everyone, my name is Njoku Chijoke Philip. This presentation builds upon the work completed in part 1 of this laboratory exercise, where an ethical presentation test was performed against the Lab3 level 1 virtual machine. During that exercise, vulnerabilities within the target system were identified, analyzed, and successfully exploited in a controlled laboratory environment. The purpose of this second phase is to explain at a high level how root access was obtained, discuss practical mitigation strategies that organizations can implement when upgrading or replacing vulnerable system is not an option, and provide an executive overview of today's evolving cyber threat landscape. For clarity, to ensure each requirement of this assessment is adequately addressed, this presentation has been divided into two parts. In this first part, I will summarize the attack process and discuss the security controls that could have prevented the compromise. In part 2, I will provide an executive briefing on current cyber attack trends before explaining several common attack techniques and their classifications. With that said, let us begin. Ethical hacking has become one of the most valuable cybersecurity practices because it enables organizations to discover security weaknesses before malicious attackers exploit them. Unlike cyber criminals, ethical hackers operate with authorized and within defined rules of engagement. Their objective is not to damage system but to evaluate an organization's security picture and posture, identify vulnerabilities, and recommend evolvements that reduce business risk. According to the National Institute of Standard and Technology, vulnerability assessment and penetration testing remain essential components of an organization's overall risk management strategy because they provide evidence-based insights into existing security weaknesses. NIST 2022. The target used during the laboratory exercise was Lab3 level 1 virtual machine, a deliberately valuable and deliberately vulnerable learning system designed for cybersecurity education. Although the system itself intentionally insecure. Although the system itself is intentionally insecure, the techniques demonstrated throughout this assessment closely resemble those used by real-world attackers against poorly secured production environments. The attack began with reconnaissance, which is the process of gathering information about the target environment. During this stage, network discovery techniques were used to identify active hosts and determine which services were exposed to the network. Reconnaissance is often considered one of the most important phases of an attack because the information collected determines which attack paths are most likely to succeed. Following the reconnaissance, the next phase involves service enumeration. Enumeration provides more detailed information about the services discovered during the reconnaissance, including software versions, configurations, and known weaknesses. By analyzing these services, it became possible to identify outdated applications that contained publicly documented vulnerabilities. This illustrates an important lesson for organizations. Attackers frequently exploit known vulnerabilities that remain unpatched rather than discovering entirely new ones. CISA continually emphasizes that organizations should prioritize remediation of known exploited vulnerabilities because attackers actively target systems that have not been adequately maintained. CISA 2025. After identifying a suitable vulnerability exploitation, After identifying a suitable vulnerability, exploitation was successfully performed to obtain initial access to the target system. However, obtaining an initial foothold does not necessarily provide unrestricted control. In most real-world attackers, adversaries seek to increase their permissions through privilege escalation, allowing them to move beyond the limitations of a standard user account. Privilege escalation was subsequently achieved during the laboratory exercise, resulting in full root access to the Kerberos virtual machine. Root privilege represents the highest level of authority within a Linux operating system, granting unrestricted access to files, user accounts, system processes, and security configurations. To demonstrate complete administrative control, a new privileged user account was created, although this activity was performed solely within an isolated laboratory environment. It effectively demonstrates the level of control an attacker could obtain if similar vulnerability exists within an organization's production infrastructure. From an executive perspective, the outcome of this exercise highlights a significant business concern. Once an attacker achieves administrative access, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of organizations' information becomes severely compromised. Sensitive data may, may be stolen, critical services disrupted, malicious software deployed, or additional system compromised through lateral movement across the network. Consequently, preventing privilege escalation should be viewed not only as a technical objective, but also as an organizational risk management priority. Having explained how compromise occurred, the next question becomes, how would this attack have been prevented if upgrading or replacing the vulnerable system was not an option? The first recommendation is implementing the principle of least privilege, often refers to as POILP. Under this security principle, user applications and administrators are granted only the minimum permissions necessary to perform their assigned responsibilities. Restricting unnecessary administrative privileges significantly reduces the opportunities available for attackers to escalate privileges after gaining initial access. According to guidance published by Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Enforcing least privilege access is one of the most effective method of reducing impacts of compromised accounts and limiting attackers' movement within an environment. See ISA 2025. The second recommendation is continuous monitoring, supported by centralized logging. Organizations could continuously monitor authentication attempts, privilege changes, unusual process execution, failed login attempts, and other indicators of suspicious behavior. Collecting logs from multiple systems into a centralized security information and event management, or SIEM platform enables security analysis to correlate events more effectively and detect attacks before significant damage occurs. NIST identifies continuous monitoring as a critical capability for maintaining organizational awareness of emerging cybersecurity risks and supporting timely incident response. NIST 2022. Another essential defensive control is file integrity monitoring. Many privilege escalation techniques requires modifications to operating system files, configuration settings, scheduled tasks, or system binaries. File integrity monitoring solutions continuously compare critical files against trusted baselines and immediately alert security personnel whenever unauthorized changes occurs. Early detection enables organizations to investigate suspicious activities before attackers establish persistence or expand their access. Organizations should also implement network segmentation to reduce opportunities for lateral movement. Instead of allowing unrestricted communication between all systems, sensitive servers should be isolated within protected network segments governed by strict access control policies. Even if one system becomes compromised, segmentation prevents attackers from moving freely throughout the environment and limits the overall impact of the breach. This defense in-depth strategy has become increasingly important as organizations continue to operate complex hybrid environments that include cloud services, on-permission infrastructure, and remote users. Another highly recommended security measure is deployment of endpoint detection and response or EDR technology. Unlike traditional antivirus software, which primarily relies on signature-based detection, EDR solutions continuously analyze endpoint behavior to identify suspicious activities such as privilege abuse, credential theft, malicious scripting, persistence mechanisms, and unusual process execution. This behavioral approach enables security teams to detect sophisticated attacks that may otherwise evade conventional security controls. Technical safeguards alone, however, cannot eliminate cyber risk. Human error continues to represent one of the most frequently exploited vulnerabilities within the modern organizations. Employees should therefore receive ongoing security awareness training that equips them to recognize phishing emails, fraudulent websites, malicious attachments, and other forms of social engineering. Microsoft's Digital Defense Report highlights that identity or identify-based attacks and credential thefts remain among the most common techniques used by threat actors because compromising legitimate user credentials often require significantly less effort than exploiting well-secured system. Microsoft 2024. Finally, every organization should maintain a comprehensive incident response capability. Despite implementing preventive security controls, no organization can completely eliminate cyber risk. A well developed incident response plan enables security teams to rapidly identified, contain, eradicate, and recover from cyber incident while minimizing operational destruction and financial losses. NIST Computer Security Incident Handling Guide continues to recommend structured preparation, detection, contaminate, containment, recovery, and post-incident learning as essential environment of effective cyber resilience. Chisonsky and al. 2012. Collectively, these recommendations demonstrate an important principle of modern cybersecurity. No signal security control can prevent every attack. Instead, organizations achieve resilience by implementing layered security, often referred to as defense in depth. By combining least privilege access, continuous monitoring, file integrity monitoring, network segmentation, endpoint detection and response, employee awareness training, and structured incident response planning, organizations significantly increase the effective required for attackers to compromise critical systems successfully. This includes part 1 of my presentation. In part 2, I will provide an executive briefing on the current cyber threat landscape, discuss notable attack trends observed in recent weeks, and explain the required attack categories, including buffer overflow, privilege escalation, rootkits, trojans, backdoors, viruses, return-oriented programming, and common social engineering attacks. I will also conclude the presentation with key recommendations for strengthening organizational cybersecurity. Welcome to part 2 of my presentation. In the first part of this presentation, I will discuss how Kerberos Level 1 virtual machine was compromised through ethical penetration testing and explain several mitigation strategies that organizations can implement to reduce the likelihood of similar attack in this second and final part. I will provide an executive briefing on current cybersecurity threats before defining the attack categories specified in this assessment and concluding with key recommendations. Cybersecurity continues to evolve rapidly, and recent threat intelligence demonstrate that organizations face increasingly sophisticated attacks. However, despite advances in attacker capabilities, many successful compromises still begin with familiar weaknesses, including unpatched vulnerabilities, stolen credentials, phishing attack, and poor security configuration. Recent security and cybersecurity adversaries have shown that attackers continue to exploit internet-facing systems within days of vulnerabilities becoming publicly known. For example, Microsoft's July 2026 security update addressed hundreds of vulnerabilities across Windows, including several capable of enabling remote code execution and privilege escalation, reinforcing the importance of timely vulnerability management and security patching. Similarly, government agencies including FBI, NSA, CISA, and the US Department of Energy recently issued a joint advisory warning that state-sponsored threat actors are actively targeting critical infrastructure, particularly operational technology environments supporting water and energy sectors. The advisory emphasized that attackers are increasingly targeting to manipulate industrial control systems and disrupt essential services, highlighting the growth importance of protecting both information technology and operational technology environments. Another significant trend observed in recent weeks is the continued increase in supply chain attacks. Rather than targeting organizations directly, cybercriminals increasingly compromise trusted third-party software vendors and service providers to gain access to multiple victims simultaneously. Financial Times recently reported that attacks targeting software supply chains continues to increase because organizations rely heavily on interconnected digital ecosystems. This reinforces the need for organizations to continuously evaluate third-party security risks alongside their own internal security controls. From an executive perspective, these developments demonstrate that cybersecurity is no longer solely an information technology issue. Instead, it has become business risk affecting operational continuity, regulatory compliance, organizational reputation, customer trust, and financial performance. Consequently, executive leadership should view cybersecurity investment as an essential component of enterprise risk management rather than simply an operational expansion. Having provided this executive overview, I will now explain the target techniques required by this assessment. The first attack category is buffer overflow. A buffer overflow occurs when a program writes more information into a memory buffer than it was designed to store. The additional data overrides adjacent memory locations, potentially allowing attackers to execute malicious code or cause the application to crash. Buffer overflow attacks are classified as memory corruption attacks because they exploit improper memory management within software applications. Secure coding practices, compiler protections, and regular application testing remain effective method for reducing this risk. The second category is privilege escalation. Privilege escalation occurs when an attacker successfully obtains permissions beyond those original assigned after gaining initial access to a system. This was demonstrated during the Chaoptrix laboratory exercise, where limited access was expanded into full root privileges. Privilege escalation classified as a post-exploitation attack because it occurs after an attacker has already established an initial foothold. Organizations can significantly reduce this risk through least privilege access, timely vulnerability remediation, and continuous monitoring of privileged accounts. The third category is rootkits. A rootkit is a collection of malicious software specifically designed to hide an attacker's presence while maintaining privileged access to a compromised system. Rootkits often manipulate operating system components to conceal malicious processes, files, and network connections from security software and system administrators because their primary purpose is to prevent and avoid detection while maintaining persistence. Rootkits are classified as stealth malware. The fourth category is Trojans, also known as Trojan horses. A Trojan disguises itself as legitimate software to deceive users into installing it voluntarily. Once executed, it may steal information, install additional malware, or create unauthorized access to the compromised system. Unlike viruses, Trojans do not self-replicate. Instead, they rely primarily on deception and user interaction. Therefore, they are classified as social engineering malware. The fifth category is backdoors. A backdoor is a hidden mechanism that bypasses normal authentication controls, allowing unauthorized users to access the system without following standard security procedures. Attackers frequently install backdoors after compromising a system to ensure they can gain access even if the original vulnerability has been patched. Backdoors are classified as persistence mechanisms because they enable attackers to maintain long-term access to compromised environments. The sixth category is viruses. A computer virus is malicious software that attaches itself to legitimate files or applications and spread system performance and spread and a computer virus is a malicious software that attaches itself to legitimate files or applications and spreads when infected programs are executed. Viruses may corrupt files, delete data, reduce system performance, or disrupt normal business operations since they are reproduced by infecting additional files. Viruses are classified as self-replicating malware. The seven categories return-oriented programming, commonly referred to as ROP. Return-oriented programming is advanced exploitation techniques that enables attackers to execute malicious actions without injecting new executable code into memory. Instead, attackers reuse existing instruction sequences already present within legitimate software to bypass modern security protections such as data execution prevention. As a result, return-oriented programming is classified as an exploit technique used to defeat memory protection mechanisms. The final category is social engineering attacks. Social engineering refers to attacks that exploit human psychology rather than technical vulnerabilities. Common examples include phishing, spear phishing, pretesting, baiting, business email compromise, and voice impersonation attacks. Rather than attacking computer systems directly, attackers manipulate individuals into revealing confidential information or performing action that compromise security. Consequently, social engineering is classified as human focus attack. CISA continues to emphasize that regular security awareness training remains one of the most effective defenses because educated employees are significantly more likely to recognize suspicious communications before responding to them. Having discussed these attack categories, an important observation becomes clear. Although the techniques themselves vary considerably, they often form part of a larger attack chain. For example, a phishing email may deliver a Trojan. The Trojan may install a backdoor. The attacker may perform privilege escalation to obtain administrative access and finally deploy a rootkit to remain hidden while maintaining persistence. Understanding this relationship enables organizations to implement multiple layers of security that interrupt targets before they achieve their objectives. In conclusion, this laboratory exercise has demonstrated the complete life cycle of an ethical penetration test, beginning with reconnaissance and enumeration, processing through vulnerability identification, exploitation, privilege escalation, and finally, developing practical recommendations for improving organizational security. While the chaotic virtual machine was intentionally vulnerable for educational purposes, the techniques demonstrated closely resemble those used by real-world attackers against inadequately secured systems. More importantly, this exercise demonstrates that cybersecurity is not simply responding to attacks after they occur. It is about proactively identifying weaknesses, implementing layered security controls, continuously monitoring the environment, educating users, and fostering a culture of security throughout the organization. Ethical hackers provide organizations with valuable insights into how attackers operate while enabling defenders to strengthen their systems before vulnerabilities can be exploited. As cyber threats continue to evolve, organizations that combine proactive security testing, effective governance, employee awareness, and continuous improvement will be significantly better positioned to protect their information assets and maintain business resilience. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention. My references will be added at the bottom of this presentation. Thank you for listening.